So throughout the last year, I've been giving a lot of advice to my friends and peers on how to break into the tech industry. And through all these talks, I get asked a fair question. What is it that you even do as a software engineer? Being a software engineer, it's one of those roles that are highly sought after, it's paid well, and a lot of people are trying to break into the industry now. But unless if you've actually worked in industry previously, it's really hard to know what a software engineer really does. And so I hope to help demystify the process of the roles and responsibilities of a software engineer here today. Welcome back to my channel. My name is Justin. I know it's been a while since I've last uploaded a video, but I've really just been trying to get adjusted to working full time and also trying to get my life settled down. For those of you who are new here, I currently work as a full-time software engineer at Amazon. I have previously interned at Amazon, at JPMorgan Chase, worked at a startup, and I've built applications from web applications all the way to machine learning. So now that you know my background, let's get into what a software engineer actually does and where does a software engineer sit in the whole process of building an actual product. So first, what does a software engineer actually do? At a very high level, we are problem solvers. We solve problems, and programming is just one of those tools that we may have. But I just want to make it very clear that coding is not always the answer. Usually the way it works, at least in a corporate structure, is that you will be on a team of software engineers with a manager. And your team will own a product or multiple products, and your manager will work with a product manager in order to determine what features should get placed on your product's roadmap, which will help determine when these features actually get built and how they will be prioritized. Some of the things that a software engineer needs to consider when building a product is, what are the technologies used? What are the pros and cons of one strategy versus another strategy? How are you going to track the metrics of how much a feature is used? How is the customer experience going to be like? How do you plan to maintain the product or make sure that the product is secure? And there's a lot more to it, but the reality is that when you're building something from scratch, there's just a lot that goes into the process. An example I have of actually taking these sort of things into consideration and doing problem solving is that I used to work at school and I had to build an application for them for $0. But the problem is that I had to host a database online, and usually in order to have a server running online, you have to pay money. So the way that I actually ended up figuring this out was that I built a GUI online for free, and then I hooked it up to a Google Sheet as a backend database. And it's actually problems like this that I think really epitomizes what our job as software engineers is. It's to problem solve and to use our knowledge of coding and programming and of how the web works to actually come up with a solution like this. Because even though it's easy to think about, you still may not know how to implement it, and a software engineer really puts the knowledge and the implementation all together. So now onto the types of software engineers. We do want to know that there are probably tons of software engineering positions that I probably won't mention here, but I do want to give you a general overview of what the most popular types of positions are. There are front-end engineers who just focus on the user interface. There are back-end engineers who focus just on application logic, such as login, authentication, databases, scalability, so on. There are device or platform-specific engineers such as iOS engineers and Android engineers, and tons more. For me, I do full-stack web development, meaning that I mainly work on technologies that are meant to be deployed on the web, and I can build front-end and back-end applications, though I tend to lean more on front-end because that's just where my experience comes from. One of the biggest issues I find of a lot of people who have not previously worked as a software engineer or people who are outside of the tech industry is that they will often think that if you're a software engineer, that you can just do it all. That if you're a software engineer, you automatically know how to build a website, you automatically know how to do an iOS app, you automatically know how to build an Android app, and that just isn't true. The software engineering industry is so vast, so large, that you will have a specialty that you fall into, and during your first couple of years of working as a software engineer, you'll probably be figuring that out, either through self-discovery and self-learning, through working on a team, and even within your general specialty, you'll probably have even more sub-specialties that you're familiar with, such as maybe you focus on one technology stack versus another. So in general, what does it actually look like to have a feature built from front to back? So the first step is to actually allocate the work. So every 2 weeks, or what we call a sprint, the team will come together and figure out how to actually distribute work that we have on our feature roadmap. Now, while it may be easy to just think that the only thing a software engineer does is build features, we actually also need to take care of other things. We need to take care of things that we call operational work, which means to fix bugs, to take care of customer issues, to do investigations into other issues that might have occurred during the past 2 weeks. And so really during this initial step of planning every 2 weeks during the sprint, it's really about learning how to prioritize and deprioritize work as need be. The second thing is after getting a feature, or at least on my team, we need to create something called a feature document, which is going to talk all about why are you building this feature? Who is the feature going to affect? What is your initial investigation into the code base and how do you plan to implement it? What are the UI changes that we might need to make? Are there any additional considerations? What are the expected inputs and outputs of this feature? And anything related to it will have to get compiled down into this feature document to then present to the team at a later date to make sure that if there are any questions that you can ask them then, or the team will ask you questions on how you actually plan to go about it if you've considered some of the edge cases. And really it's a time to get feedback from your peers so that you are actually able to implement a good feature. Once all that is approved, you got to go ahead and you can start actually coding. So now the third thing is that you're coding. And you know, the nice thing about coding is it would be great if it always went as expected, but there are always issues that comes up. Maybe midweek, there's a customer issue that comes up and it just blocks the rest of your week from progressing. You can't code anymore. Maybe there are issues when you're actually implementing the feature that you find out, hey, the way that you thought about implementing this in your feature document, yeah, that turns out that it's not going to work. Maybe you have a lack of knowledge and that's going to require you to set up time to pair program with another more senior engineer on your team. Or maybe you need to go and talk cross team and ask them for more information. And so funny enough, a lot of our work while actually working is learning how to prioritize and deprioritize issues accordingly to make sure that we stay on track. And finally, after X amount of sprints, you know, you're going to have your feature, it's going to be tested, it's ready to go, ready to ship. You're going to have to work with your manager, your product manager, your marketing team, and figure out a date on when to actually ship this product. What is the outreach going to be like? Do you need to update any documentation pages and so on? And finally, once all that's done, your feature is officially shipped, and then now you have to start the whole process over again. But honestly, I have to say that when you do finally ship a feature, it's super rewarding to see the metrics come in and hopefully your feature is being used and that people are actually able to put your work to good use. As a software engineer, you are ultimately the bottleneck of what gets built, and you are the person who's going to help determine the success of your team. Finally is a breakdown of like, what is my typical day at work? So in general, I would say about 30% of my time is spent talking, planning, doing logistics, going into meetings with my teammates. About 40% of my time is spent on operational work. So once again, customer issues and so on. And also something called on-call, which for those of you who don't know, it's essentially every so often you'll be rotated to be on-call on your team, which is that if something goes wrong, you will get paged to come in and help solve the issue. So usually you're not going to have to drive into the office. You'll just remotely log in online, see if the issue is persistent, and then figure out on how to solve it then and there, or reprioritize it to solve it in the morning. Luckily, my team actually has an extremely light on-call, but this is heavily dependent per team, and especially for products that are live and being used by millions of users, you'll probably have a heavier on-call. Though in that sort of situation, you'll imagine that the rotations are going to be more frequent so that every engineer will have more of a break, and every team will also set up their rotations accordingly to make sure that every software engineer has the time that they need in order to rest and recover. And finally, I would say that the last 30% of my time is spent actually coding. So I usually like to, when I code, set aside 4 to 5 hours of my time to be in a flow state. I really think that coding is very similar to like writing an essay or writing a novel. You have to be in a state of mind to where you can actually get work done. And if you try to code and stop, it's really difficult to make any progress. Finally, it's going to be tackling one of the biggest misconceptions I feel is in the CS industry, and also talk about the number one bad thing and the number one good thing I feel in the tech industry in my own personal opinion. The number one thing I want to talk about that is the biggest misconception in the tech industry is on the work that is actually required. And so I actually made a video about this before, but repeating it here, I think a lot of people go into CS thinking that, you know, as long as they get a degree, as long as they go through a boot camp or something like that, that they'll just automatically become a software engineer. But that's not true. A degree or a boot camp or something like that doesn't at all guarantee you to be a software engineer. Instead, it requires you to do a lot of self-learning, and it requires you to gain a lot of the skills independently. And in order to get some of the top jobs out there, you know, you're going to really need to be driving yourself forward. The tech industry is extremely based on the actual skills that you have and the effort that you put into it. And so it's actually because of that, that even with a 2.8 GPA that I was able to get into Amazon, and why you have success stories of people who are self-taught developers who didn't even start in the CS industry, who were able to break in and earn, you know, 6-figure salaries. So I do think that while the industry is being flooded with new people every day trying to become a software engineer, a lot of times they don't understand the actual work that will go into it, and then it'll be too late. Okay, so what's the worst thing that I hate about the tech industry? I think for me at least, it's going to be on-call. On-call is one of the worst things that I hate. And even though some teams will not have on-call, most teams will, especially at larger companies, because your team ultimately owns a product. And if that product goes down, someone needs to fix it. I also think that ultimately, working in tech is still work. You're not necessarily going to be working on the next big Instagram, right? You're not going to be working on the next Facebook. You might be working on a small feature here, a small feature there. And the work is exhausting. It is very mentally draining. And that while it's not necessarily like a hard labor sort of job, that you will still be exhausted at the end of the day. Okay, so what's my favorite thing about being a software engineer? What is the good parts of it? So I'm going to say the money, the freedom, the scalability, and the knowledge that comes with being a software engineer. I think especially the knowledge and understanding how everything works to make sure that it's not just in a black box is really exciting, because a lot of times people, talking to my friends, talking to my peers, talking to my parents, they don't necessarily know how things work, but you as a software engineer, you understand how the technology that people are every day using works. And I think especially if you're privy to this knowledge, there's a lot of things online that software engineers build for each other to make things easier. There are things online that you can get for free and automate entire workflows just by knowing a bit of programming. So having this knowledge is super exciting for me, and I've definitely been able to utilize it to my advantage and just do things at scale, because now I have code to automate and do the work of like 100 people. I also obviously think that the money coming out of it, while it's not everything, is really nice, because when I eventually did graduate college, I needed to worry about student debt. How am I going to pay rent? How am I going to pay food? How am I going to pay for insurance? All these things is ultimately a real world concern, and being able to come out of college and earn a 6-figure salary, it's pretty freeing to be able to do that. And I think that being a software engineer with all this knowledge, with this freedom, it gives you wiggle room to do things that you like to do on the side. So for example, I'm doing YouTube right now, and I know other software engineers might do art and drawing, they might go out, go hiking, right? So I do think that's one of the benefits of being a software engineer, also being able to explore your other passions a lot more easily. Anyways, that's it. I know that was a lot, but I hope that you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys want to see more videos of me talking about the tech industry and talking about my life, feel free to hit the subscribe button. I'll see you all next time. Stay awesome, stay comfy, stay happy. Signing out. Bye-bye.